Blackwells Kingdom. When her father was accused of treason, Lady Isolde of Ashenmere had only one choice: seek out Sir Aldrich Blackwell, a knight known for his ruthless nature. He studied her, amusement flickering in his dark gaze. "You ask for my aid, my lady," he murmured. "But tell me, how much are you willing to risk?" Chapter 1. The Raven's Accusation. The parchment felt like ice in Isolde's hands, the royal seal a cruel mockery of the warmth it should have represented. Her father, Lord Elric of Ashenmere, was summoned to answer charges of treason. Treason. The word echoed in the cavernous hall, bouncing off the ancient stone walls, each reverberation a hammer blow to Isolde's heart. Her father, a man whose loyalty to the crown was as unwavering as the ancient oak that stood sentinel over their ancestral lands, a traitor? It was unthinkable, a vile lie spun from the poisoned whispers of courtly rivals. The raven that had delivered the missive was long gone, but its shadow seemed to linger, a dark omen perched on the high, arched window. Outside, the late autumn wind howled through the skeletal branches of the trees, mirroring the tempest raging within her. The scent of wood smoke from the hearth, usually a comfort, now felt cloying, suffocating. Isolde's fingers, usually adept at embroidery or guiding the strings of her lute, trembled as she traced the sharp, angular script of the royal scribe. Each word was a carefully crafted barb, designed to wound, to instill fear. Lord Elric is to present himself before the king's justice within the fortnight, to answer accusations of conspiring with the northern rebels. Failure to comply will result in forfeiture of lands, titles, and life. Her breath hitched. Forfeiture of life. The phrase hung in the air, heavy and cold. Her father, a man of robust health and unwavering spirit, reduced to nothing more than a name on a parchment, a life to be extinguished. Lady Alara, Isolde's mother, a woman whose gentle spirit had always been a counterpoint to Lord Elric's strength, stood beside the massive hearth, her face ashen, her usually vibrant green eyes dulled with a fear that mirrored Isolde's own. She clutched a rosary, her lips moving in silent prayer, the beads clicking softly, a fragile rhythm against the backdrop of the howling wind. "Mother," Isolde began, her voice a strained whisper, "this cannot be." "Father would never." Lady Alara raised a hand, silencing her. Her gaze was distant, lost in a sea of worry. "The king's justice, it is not always just, Isolde. There are forces at play. Enemies who would see her father brought low." Isolde knew this to be true. Her father, a man of unwavering principle, had made enemies in his long years of service to the crown. He had spoken out against corruption, against the unchecked ambition of certain nobles. He had, perhaps, been too honest, too forthright, in a court where deceit and whispers were the currency of power. The tapestry behind her mother, depicting the founding of Ashenmere, seemed to mock her with its vibrant colors, its scenes of heroic knights and valiant deeds. The reality was far more grim, far more treacherous. "We must act quickly," Isolde said, forcing a strength she didn't feel into her voice. "We must find someone powerful enough to intercede on father's behalf." Her mother's gaze finally met hers, a flicker of something akin to hope in their depths. "There is one, but the price." She trailed off, her voice choked with unspoken dread. Isolde knew who her mother meant. Sir Aldrich Blackwell, the Knight of Blackwood. A man shrouded in rumor and whispered tales of ruthlessness. A warrior whose allegiance was said to be bought and sold. A man whose very name sent shivers down the spines of even the bravest knights. He was a solitary wolf, a creature of the shadows, and his aid, if it could be secured, would come at a steep cost. He was also, Isolde knew, their last desperate hope. The journey to Blackwood Keep was arduous, the roads treacherous with mud and the threat of bandits. The wind whipped at Isolde's cloak, the cold seeping into her bones. She rode beside Master Gareth, her father's oldest and most trusted retainer, his face grim, his hand never far from the hilt of his sword. The silence between them was heavy, punctuated only by the rhythmic thud of the horse's hooves and the mournful cry of the wind. Ashenmere, with its familiar comforts, its bustling kitchens and sun-drenched gardens, felt a lifetime away. Isolde's world, once defined by needlepoint and courtly dances, had been shattered, replaced by a terrifying uncertainty. She clung to the hope, fragile as it was, that Sir Aldrich Blackwell would be their salvation. But even as she prayed for his intervention, a knot of fear tightened in her stomach. What price would he demand for his loyalty? What would he ask of her, the daughter of a man accused of treason? The questions circled in her mind, unanswered, a chilling premonition of the darkness that lay ahead. The keep came into view as their small party approached Blackwood. The silhouette before the fading light of the moon and gray sky would be her answer. Chapter 2. Shadows of Ashenmere. Blackwood Keep was a stark, imposing structure, a fortress carved from the very rock of the cliffs it commanded. It was less a home and more a weapon, a testament to the grim reputation of its master. No banners flew from its towers, no welcoming lights shone from its windows. Only the wind, whistling through the narrow arrow slits, offered any semblance of life. As Isolde and Master Gareth approached the heavy oak gate, studded with iron and reinforced with thick bands of steel, two guards emerged, their faces obscured by the shadows of their helmets. They were clad in black, their armor devoid of any heraldry, their silence more menacing than any shouted challenge. "State your purpose," one of the guards growled, his voice a low rumble that echoed in the gathering dusk. "I am Lady Isolde of Ashenmere," Isolde replied, forcing her voice to remain steady despite the tremor in her heart. "I seek an audience with Sir Aldrich Blackwell." The guards exchanged a glance, a flicker of something unreadable passing between them. "The Knight of Blackwood receives no visitors," the second guard stated, his tone flat and devoid of any warmth. "This is a matter of grave importance," Isolde insisted, her voice rising slightly. "It concerns my father, Lord Elric of Ashenmere, who has been falsely accused of treason." The first guard shifted his weight, the movement of his armor a metallic rasp in the silence. "The Knight of Blackwood is not concerned with the affairs of traitors." Desperation clawed at Isolde. She had anticipated resistance, but this cold indifference was almost unbearable. "He will be concerned," she said, her voice laced with a steel she didn't know she possessed. "Tell him that the daughter of Elric of Ashenmere offers a bargain. A pact. One that will benefit him greatly." The guards remained silent for a long moment, their eyes, hidden behind their visors, assessing her. Isolde held her breath, her fate hanging in the balance. Finally, the first guard nodded, a curt, almost imperceptible movement. "Wait here." The gate creaked open, revealing a dark, narrow passage that led into the heart of the keep. Isolde and Master Gareth were escorted through a maze of corridors, the air growing colder and damper with each step. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the echo of their footsteps and the occasional drip of water from the unseen ceiling. They were finally led into a large, sparsely furnished hall. A single fire burned in a massive hearth, casting flickering shadows on the stone walls. There were no tapestries, no soft furnishings, only the cold, hard reality of stone and steel. A long, heavy table dominated the center of the room, its surface scarred and stained, a testament to countless meals and perhaps darker deeds. At the head of the table, seated in a high-backed chair that seemed carved from the very shadows themselves, sat Sir Aldrich Blackwell. He was even more imposing than Isolde had imagined. Tall and broad-shouldered, with a presence that filled the room, he was clad in black leather and steel, his armor gleaming faintly in the firelight. His face was lean and hard, etched with the lines of countless battles, his eyes a dark, piercing gray that seemed to see straight through her. A scar, a thin white line, traced its way from his temple to his jaw, a silent reminder of his past. He held a silver goblet in one hand, the metal gleaming in contrast to the dark leather of his gloves. He did not rise to greet them. He simply watched them, his gaze unwavering, his expression unreadable. "Lady Isolde," he said, his voice a low, resonant murmur that seemed to vibrate in the very stones of the hall. "You have come a long way to seek my aid." Isolde swallowed, her throat suddenly dry. "Sir Aldrich," she replied, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "My father has been falsely accused. He is innocent." A flicker of amusement, cold and fleeting, crossed his lips. "Innocence is a rare commodity in these times, my lady, especially in the king's court." "He is loyal to the crown," Isolde insisted. "He would never betray his king." Aldrich leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving hers. "Loyalty is a fickle thing. It can be bought, sold, or broken." "My father's loyalty is not for sale," Isolde retorted, her voice rising in anger. "And it has never been broken." He raised an eyebrow, a gesture that was both challenging and dismissive. "Then why has he been accused?" "The king's justice does not act without reason." "The reason is lies," Isolde said, her voice trembling with the force of her conviction. "Lies spun by his enemies, those who envy his position, his influence." Aldrich took a slow sip from his goblet, his gaze never leaving hers. "And you believe I can unravel these lies? That I can sway the king's justice?" "I believe you are the only one who can," Isolde said, her voice barely a whisper. "You have influence. You have power." He set the goblet down on the table, the sound echoing in the silence. "Power comes at a price, my lady, and my influence is not easily bought." Isolde took a deep breath, steeling herself. "I am prepared to pay that price." He studied her, his dark gaze intense, probing. "You asked for my aid, my lady," he murmured. "But tell me, how much are you willing to risk?" The shadows in the hall seemed to deepen, the fire casting dancing, uncertain light on his face. The question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications, a challenge and a promise all in one. The fate of Ashenmere, of her father, and perhaps of her own soul, rested on her answer. Chapter 3. The Night of Blackwood. Isolde met his gaze, her chin lifted in defiance, though her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. "I am willing to risk everything," she declared, the words echoing in the vast, silent hall. "My father's life, his honor, are worth any price." Aldrich Blackwell remained motionless, his expression unchanged, but a subtle shift in his posture, a slight leaning forward, betrayed his interest. He was a predator, sensing the vulnerability of his prey, but also, perhaps, a flicker of respect for her courage. "Everything is a broad term, my lady," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the very stones of the floor. "Be specific. What are you offering in exchange for my intervention?" Isolde had rehearsed this moment countless times during the arduous journey to Blackwood Keep, but now, facing the reality of the man, the words seemed to catch in her throat. She thought of her father, his kind smile, his unwavering strength, his belief in justice. That image gave her the courage to speak. "Ashenmere is a wealthy estate," she began, her voice gaining strength. "Its lands are fertile, its forests rich with timber, its mines yield a considerable income. I offer you a share of that wealth, a significant share." Aldrich waved a dismissive hand, the gesture almost contemptuous. "Gold? I have enough gold. It holds little interest for me." Isolde's heart sank. She had anticipated this, but the blunt rejection still stung. "Then what do you want?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. He leaned forward, his dark eyes locking onto hers, the intensity of his gaze almost overwhelming. "I want something more valuable than gold, my lady. Something that cannot be easily bought or sold." A cold dread crept up Isolde's spine. She had heard the rumors, the whispers about Aldrich Blackwell's dark desires, his penchant for unconventional arrangements. She forced herself to remain calm, to meet his gaze without flinching. "What is it you desire, Sir Aldrich?" she asked, her voice steady despite the turmoil within her. He smiled then, a slow, predatory smile that sent a shiver down her spine. It was not a smile of warmth or amusement, but rather the smile of a wolf who had cornered its prey. "I want a bond," he said, his voice soft, yet laced with steel. "A tie that binds you to me, that ensures your cooperation. A guarantee that you will not betray me, as your father is accused of betraying the king." Isolde's mind raced. What kind of bond? What did he mean? The rumors, the whispers, could they be true? What kind of bond? She stammered, her voice barely audible. He stood then, towering over her, his presence filling the room. He circled the table slowly, like a wolf stalking its prey, his eyes never leaving hers. A marriage bond, my lady, he said, his voice a low murmur that seemed to caress her skin. I want you to become my wife. The word struck Isolde like a physical blow. Marriage? To him? To this cold, ruthless man? This creature of the shadows? It was unthinkable. She had dreamed of marriage, of course, as all young women did. But her dreams had been filled with images of a kind, gentle husband, a love match, a partnership built on mutual respect and affection. Not this forced union with a man she barely knew, a man who inspired fear and dread. But the image of her father, imprisoned, facing execution, flashed before her eyes. She had no choice. She had to save him, even if it meant sacrificing her own happiness, her own dreams. You would marry me? She asked, her voice trembling. The daughter of an accused traitor? He stopped his circling, standing directly in front of her, his dark eyes boring into hers. Your father's alleged crimes are of little consequence to me. I see something in you, Lady Isolde. A strength, a fire. That intrigues me. And Ashimere is a strategically valuable estate. Its proximity to the northern border is advantageous. So, it was not love, not even affection, that motivated him. It was power, strategy, cold calculation. Isolde felt a surge of anger, of resentment, but she quickly suppressed it. She had to be practical. She had to think of her father. And if I agree? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Will you save my father? He reached out, his hand hovering near her cheek, but not quite touching. The gesture was both intimate and threatening. I will use all my influence, all my power, to ensure that he is cleared of these false charges. I will protect him, as I will protect you as my wife. Isolde closed her eyes, a single tear escaping and tracing a path down her cheek. She was trapped. She had walked into this lion's den willingly, seeking his aid, and now she was caught in his trap. But she had no other choice. I agree, she said, her voice choked with emotion. I will marry you, Sir Aldrich. I will be your wife. He smiled again, that same predatory smile, but this time there was a flicker of something else in his eyes. Satisfaction? Triumph? Or perhaps something more, something that Isolde could not quite decipher. Then it is settled, he said, his voice a low rumble. The pact is made. You are mine, Lady Isolde. And Ashimere is under my protection. He reached out, and this time his fingers brushed against her cheek, a fleeting touch that sent a shiver through her. The fire in the hearth crackled, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls, and Isolde felt as though she had just stepped into a darkness far deeper and more dangerous than she had ever imagined. The weight of her decision, the sacrifice she had made, settled upon her like a heavy cloak. She was bound to him now, the Knight of Blackwood, her fate inextricably linked to his. Chapter 4. A bargain struck in moonlight. The agreement hung in the air, heavy and irreversible, a silent testament to the desperate bargain Isolde had struck. The fire in the hearth seemed to burn lower, the shadows deepening, as if reflecting the darkness that had enveloped her future. Aldrich Blackwell, the Knight of Blackwood, her betrothed, stood before her, a figure of both power and menace. The wedding will be soon, he stated, his voice devoid of any emotion, a simple statement of fact. There is no time to waste. The king's justice moves swiftly, and your father's fate hangs in the balance. Isolde nodded, her throat tight with unshed tears. She had expected this, had known that time was of the essence, but the reality of the situation was still overwhelming. She was to be married, not in the sun-drenched chapel of Ashimere, surrounded by family and friends, but in this cold, forbidding fortress, a stranger's bride. I understand, she managed to say, her voice barely a whisper. Aldrich turned and walked towards a large window that overlooked the courtyard below. The moon, A sliver of silver in the inky sky cast a pale light on his face, highlighting the harsh lines of his features, the scar that bisected his cheek. "Master Gareth," he said, addressing Isolde's companion, who had remained silent throughout the exchange, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword, his face a mask of grim disapproval. "You will return to Ashenmere. Inform Lady Alara of the arrangement. Tell her that her daughter is safe, and that I will honor my word." Master Gareth bowed stiffly, his gaze flickering between Isolde and Aldrich, his loyalty to his lord warring with his concern for his young mistress. "As you command, Sir Aldrich. And tell her," Aldrich continued, his voice hardening, "that any attempt to interfere, any attempt to dissuade her daughter, will be met with swift and severe consequences." The threat hung in the air, a chilling reminder of Aldrich's power, his ruthlessness. Isolde felt a surge of fear, not for herself, but for her mother, for the gentle woman who had always been her protector. "There will be no interference," Isolde said, her voice surprisingly strong. "My mother understands the necessity of this union. She will not oppose it." Aldrich turned back to face her, his dark eyes assessing her, searching for any sign of deceit. "Good," he said, a flicker of satisfaction in his voice. "Because I will not tolerate any defiance, any betrayal. Not from you, and not from your family." He then dismissed Master Gareth with a curt nod, and the old retainer, after a lingering, worried look at Isolde, left the hall, his footsteps echoing in the silence. Isolde and Aldrich were alone. The air crackled with tension, with unspoken emotions. Isolde felt a strange mix of fear, resentment, and a flicker of something else, something she couldn't quite define. Curiosity, perhaps? A grudging respect for the man's strength, his unwavering resolve? He walked towards her, his movements slow and deliberate, his eyes never leaving hers. He stopped a few feet away, close enough for her to feel the heat emanating from his body, to smell the scent of leather and steel that clung to him. "You are a brave woman, Lady Isolde," he said, his voice unexpectedly soft. "Most women would have crumbled under the pressure, would have wept and pleaded. But you bargained with me. You offered yourself as a sacrifice for your father's life." Isolde lifted her chin, meeting his gaze without flinching. "I did what I had to do. My father's life is worth more than my own happiness." A flicker of something akin to admiration crossed his face. "Happiness is a fleeting thing, my lady. Loyalty, duty, honor, these are the things that endure." "And love?" Isolde asked, the word escaping her lips before she could stop it. He was silent for a moment, his gaze searching hers. "Love is a weakness," he said finally, his voice flat, devoid of any emotion. "A vulnerability that can be exploited. I have no use for it." Isolde felt a pang of disappointment, a sharp ache in her heart. She had known, of course, that this marriage would be devoid of love, that it was a transaction, a bargain. But hearing him speak the words so bluntly, so coldly, still wounded her. He reached out and took her hand, his touch surprisingly gentle. His fingers were strong, calloused, the hand of a warrior. He raised her hand to his lips and brushed a kiss against her knuckles, a gesture that was both formal and intimate. "But I will honor my vows, Lady Isolde," he said, his voice a low murmur against her skin. "I will protect you. I will provide for you. And I will expect your obedience." The kiss sent a shiver through her, a mixture of fear and something else, something unexpected. A spark of something that felt almost like attraction? She quickly dismissed the thought, telling herself it was merely the result of the heightened emotions, the strangeness of the situation. He released her hand, and the warmth of his touch lingered on her skin. "Come," he said, gesturing towards a door that led from the hall. "I will show you to your chambers. You must be weary from your journey." Isolde followed him, her mind reeling, her heart heavy with a mixture of dread and a strange, unsettling anticipation. The moon, now higher in the sky, cast long, dancing shadows on the stone walls as they walked, illuminating the path to her new life, a life bound to the night of Blackwood, a life she had chosen, a life she had to embrace, a life from which there was no escape. The cold stone beneath her feet seemed to echo the chill that had settled in her soul.
She was his now.
Chapter 5. The Whispers of Court. News of Isolde's betrothal to Sir Aldrich Blackwell spread through the royal court like wildfire. Whispers followed her like shadows, clinging to her skirts, echoing in the grand halls and gilded chambers. She was the subject of speculation, pity, and a morbid curiosity. The daughter of an accused traitor, marrying the infamous Knight of Blackwood, it was a scandal of the highest order. Isolde, having arrived at court with Aldrich a few days after their agreement, bore the scrutiny with a stoic grace that belied the turmoil within her. She held her head high, her back straight, her expression carefully neutral. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her crumble, of seeing her fear. Aldrich, ever the watchful guardian, remained close by her side, his presence a silent warning to those who dared to whisper too loudly, to stare too openly. He was a shield against the court's judgment, a barrier against their scorn. But even his formidable presence could not completely silence the whispers, could not erase the pitying glances, the veiled insults. The king, a man named Oberon, with a shrewd gaze and a reputation for both wisdom and ruthlessness, had summoned them to his presence. The audience chamber was a vast, opulent space, filled with courtiers in their finery, their faces a mixture of curiosity and disdain. Isolde felt their eyes on her, assessing her, judging her. King Oberon sat on his throne, a raised dais that placed him above everyone else, a symbol of his absolute power. He was a man in his late 50s, his hair silvered with age, his face lined with the burdens of rule. But his eyes were sharp, intelligent, and missed nothing. "Sir Aldrich," the king said, his voice booming through the chamber, "you have requested an audience. And you have brought with you Lady Isolde of Ashenmere." Aldrich bowed low, his movements graceful, despite his size and the weight of his armor. "Your Majesty, I have come to present my betrothed, Lady Isolde, and to address the matter of her father, Lord Elric." The king's gaze shifted to Isolde, his eyes scrutinizing her, assessing her worth. "Lady Isolde," he said, his voice softer, but no less commanding, "your father stands accused of grave crimes. Treason is not taken lightly in this kingdom." Isolde curtsied deeply, her voice steady despite the tremor in her heart. "Your Majesty, my father is innocent. He is a loyal servant of the crown. He would never betray you." The king raised an eyebrow, a flicker of amusement in his eyes. "So you claim. But the evidence suggests otherwise." Aldrich stepped forward, his voice ringing with authority. "The evidence, Your Majesty, is flawed. It is based on the testimony of unreliable witnesses, men with their own agendas, men who seek to profit from Lord Elric's downfall." The king leaned back in his throne, his gaze shifting between Aldrich and Isolde. "And you, Sir Aldrich, are willing to vouch for Lord Elric's innocence? You, a man whose own loyalty has been questioned in the past?" A murmur ran through the court, a ripple of unease. Aldrich's reputation, his past, was a shadow that followed him, a stain that could not be easily erased. Aldrich remained unfazed. "I am willing to stake my life on it, Your Majesty," he said, his voice unwavering. "Lord Elric is a man of honor. I would not offer my hand to his daughter if I believed otherwise." The king studied him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "You are a bold man, Sir Aldrich," he said finally, "and a persuasive one." He paused, then turned his gaze back to Isolde. "Lady Isolde, your marriage to Sir Aldrich, it is a strategic alliance, one that could benefit both your houses." Isolde met his gaze, her chin lifted in defiance. "It is a bargain, Your Majesty," she said, her voice clear and strong. "A price I am willing to pay to save my father's life." The king smiled then, a slow, knowing smile. "Indeed," he said. "A very interesting bargain." He paused again, then addressed the court as a whole. "Let it be known that I am inclined to believe Sir Aldrich's assessment of Lord Elric's character. However, the charges are serious and cannot be dismissed lightly. I will appoint a special counsel to investigate the matter further. In the meantime, Lord Elric will remain under house arrest at Ashenmere, under Sir Aldric's supervision. Isolde felt a surge of relief. It was not a complete victory, but it was a reprieve. Her father was safe, for now. She glanced at Aldric, a flicker of gratitude in her eyes. He had kept his word. The king continued, and the wedding of Sir Aldric Blackwell and Lady Isolde of Ashenmere will proceed as planned. It will be a symbol of unity, of reconciliation, of faith in the crown. He looked between the pair. A symbol that masked 1,000 daggers. A unity forged on lies and betrayal. The audience was dismissed. The whispers would only intensify. The whispers that she was a pawn. The whispers that he used her. The whispers that she would be just another one of the Knight of Blackwood's conquests. Chapter 6. The Serpent's Kiss. The days leading up to the wedding were a blur of preparations, fittings, and strained courtesies. Isolde moved through it all like a ghost, her emotions numb, her mind focused solely on her father's precarious situation. She saw little of Aldric, who was occupied with the council investigating her father's case, and she was grateful for the respite. The solitude allowed her to gather her strength, to prepare herself for the life that awaited her. The court, however, was a hive of activity, buzzing with gossip and speculation. Isolde was aware of the eyes that followed her, the whispers that trailed in her wake. She endured it all with a stoic grace, refusing to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing her break. One evening, as she was walking through the castle gardens, seeking a moment of peace amidst the chaos, she encountered Lady Annalise, a woman known for her sharp tongue and her even sharper ambition. Annalise was a distant cousin of the king, and her beauty was as renowned as her cruelty. "Lady Isolde," Annalise said, her voice dripping with honeyed sarcasm. "Such a fortunate match you've made. The Knight of Blackwood is quite the catch." Isolde met her gaze, her expression carefully neutral. "Thank you, Lady Annalise," she replied, her voice devoid of any emotion. Annalise smiled, a sly, knowing smile that sent a shiver down Isolde's spine. Though, one must wonder why such a powerful man would choose the daughter of an accused traitor. Unless, of course, there's more to this alliance than meets the eye. Isolde's hand instinctively went to the small silver locket she wore around her neck, a gift from her father, a reminder of his love and his unwavering belief in her. "My reasons for marrying Sir Aldric are my own," she said, her voice firm. Annalise laughed, a light, tinkling sound that was utterly devoid of mirth. "Oh, I'm sure they are, my dear. But the court it loves to speculate. And the rumors, they're quite delicious." Isolde felt a surge of anger, but she quickly suppressed it. She would not give this woman the satisfaction of seeing her rattled. "I am not concerned with rumors," she said, her voice cold. Annalise stepped closer, her perfume, a heavy, cloying scent, almost suffocating Isolde. "But you should be, my dear, because rumors, they can have a way of becoming reality." She paused, her eyes glittering with malice. "And in this court, reality can be very dangerous." She leaned in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "They say that Sir Aldric has a dark past, that he's not the man he appears to be, that he's capable of anything." Isolde felt a chill run through her, a premonition of danger. She had heard the whispers, of course, the rumors about Aldric's ruthlessness, his unconventional methods. But she had dismissed them as idle gossip, as the product of envy and fear. Now, hearing them from Annalise's lips, they seemed to take on a new, more menacing significance. "I do not believe in rumors," Isolde said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her heart. Annalise smiled again, that same sly, knowing smile. "Perhaps you should, my dear. Because in this court the truth is often stranger than fiction." She paused, her eyes fixed on Isolde's locket. "And sometimes the greatest dangers come from those we trust the most." With that, she turned and walked away, her silken skirts rustling on the stone path, leaving Isolde alone in the gathering dusk. Isolde stood there for a long moment, her mind racing, her heart pounding. Annalise's words had struck a nerve, had planted a seed of doubt in her mind. Was Aldric truly the man he seemed to be? Was he hiding something? Was she walking into a trap far more dangerous than she had ever imagined? She touched the locket again, her fingers tracing the intricate carvings, seeking comfort in its familiar feel. She thought of her father, of his unwavering love, of his belief in her strength. She had to be strong. She had to be brave. She had to face whatever lay ahead, no matter how dark, no matter how dangerous. But as she walked back towards the castle, the shadows seemed to deepen, the whispers seemed to grow louder, and the chill in her heart intensified. Annalise's words, like a serpent's kiss, had left a lingering poison, a doubt that would not be easily erased. The upcoming wedding, once a symbol of hope, now felt like a looming threat, a descent into the unknown. She was walking into the wolf's lair, and she had no idea what awaited her there. Chapter 7. A Falcon's Flight. The morning of the wedding dawned gray and overcast, the sky mirroring the turmoil in Isolde's heart. She had slept little, her dreams haunted by images of her father, of Aldrich, of the treacherous court, of Annalise's veiled threats. She rose early, and after a simple, solitary breakfast, began the preparations for the ceremony. Her wedding gown, a gift from Aldrich, was a masterpiece of craftsmanship, made of heavy ivory silk, embroidered with silver thread and adorned with pearls. It was a dress fit for a queen, but Isolde felt like a prisoner in it, the weight of the fabric a constant reminder of the burden she carried. Her ladies-in-waiting, 2 young women assigned to her by Aldrich, fussed over her, arranging her hair, adjusting her veil, their chatter a meaningless drone in her ears. She answered their questions with polite nods and smiles, but her mind was elsewhere, focused on the ordeal that lay ahead. As she was being laced into the gown, a small, rolled-up parchment was delivered to her chambers. It bore no seal, no signature, but Isolde recognized the handwriting immediately. It was from Master Gareth, her father's trusted retainer. With trembling hands, she unrolled the parchment and read the brief, urgent message. My lady, be warned. Sir Aldrich's intentions are not as they seem. The council is a sham. Your father is in greater danger than you know. Trust no one. Flee while you can. Isolde's heart leaped into her throat. Flee? How? Where? The message offered no details, only a stark warning, a desperate plea. She crumpled the parchment in her hand, her mind racing. Could it be true? Was Aldrich deceiving her? Was her father's life still in peril? She looked at her reflection in the mirror, at the pale, frightened face staring back at her. She was a bride, on the verge of marrying a man she barely knew, a man who might be her enemy. She had made a bargain, a pact, and now she was trapped. But Master Gareth's words, flee while you can, echoed in her mind. Could she risk it? Could she abandon her father, leave him to his fate? She thought of the falcon she had often seen soaring above the fields of Ashenmere, a symbol of freedom, of independence. She longed to be like that falcon, to fly away from this gilded cage, to escape the suffocating web of courtly intrigue. But she was no falcon. She was a lady, bound by duty, by loyalty, by the vows she was about to make. Or was she? A spark of defiance ignited within her, a flicker of rebellion against the fate that had been thrust upon her. She had been passive for too long, accepting her role as a pawn in this dangerous game. It was time to take control, to fight for her own destiny, for her father's life. She made a decision. She would not flee. Not yet. But she would not be a passive victim, either. She would be watchful, alert, and she would uncover the truth, whatever it might be. And if Aldrich was indeed deceiving her, she would find a way to expose him, to save her father, even if it meant risking her own life. She took a deep breath, calming her racing heart. She instructed her ladies in waiting to leave her, telling them she needed a few moments of solitude before the ceremony. Alone in her chambers, she carefully concealed Master Gareth's message within the folds of her gown. She then took the small silver locket, her father's gift, and held it tightly in her hand, drawing strength from its familiar feel. She looked at her reflection again, but this time, the face staring back at her was not pale and frightened, but determined, resolute. She was no longer a pawn. She was a player, and she would play this game to win. The wedding ceremony was held in the castle chapel, a small, intimate space compared to the grand cathedral of Ashenmere. The guests were a select few, mostly members of Aldrich's household and a handful of courtiers who had been persuaded to attend. Isolde walked down the aisle, her head held high, her gaze fixed on the altar, where Aldrich awaited her. He was clad in black, as always, his armor gleaming in the candlelight, his expression unreadable. As she reached his side, he took her hand, his touch firm, possessive. She met his gaze, searching for any sign of deceit, any hint of the treachery that Master Gareth had warned her about. But his eyes were inscrutable, giving nothing away. The ceremony proceeded, the priest's words echoing in the silence, the vows exchanged, the rings blessed. Isolde spoke her vows in a clear, steady voice, her outward composure masking the turmoil within her. But as Aldrich placed the ring on her finger, a heavy gold band set with a single black onyx, she felt a chill run through her, a premonition of the darkness that lay ahead. She was bound to him now, not just by the vows, but by a secret pact, a hidden agenda. She was his wife, but also, perhaps, his prisoner. The falcon had been caged. But the falcon's spirit, she vowed, would never be broken. Chapter 8. The Price of Loyalty. The wedding feast was a subdued affair, a stark contrast to the lavish celebrations Isolde had always imagined. The guests, a mixture of Aldrich's retainers and a scattering of wary courtiers, ate and drank with a forced merriment, their conversations hushed, their eyes constantly darting towards the high table where Isolde and Aldrich sat. Isolde picked at her food, her appetite gone, her mind racing with the implications of Master Gareth's warning. She observed Aldrich closely, watching for any sign, any gesture, that might betray his true intentions. But he remained an enigma, his expression carefully guarded, his words measured and polite. He was the perfect host, attentive to his guests, engaging in conversation with the courtiers, ensuring that everyone's needs were met. But Isolde sensed a coldness beneath his polished exterior, a distance that separated him from everyone around him. As the evening wore on, Isolde excused herself, claiming a headache, and retired to her chambers. She was exhausted, both physically and emotionally, and longed for the solace of solitude. Her chambers, a suite of rooms overlooking the castle courtyard, were surprisingly luxurious, far more opulent than she had expected. The walls were hung with rich tapestries, the floors covered with thick carpets, and a fire burned brightly in the hearth, casting a warm glow over the room. But despite the comfort, Isolde felt a sense of unease, a feeling of being trapped. She was a prisoner in this gilded cage, surrounded by luxury, but isolated alone. She changed into a simple nightgown, a soft, white linen garment that felt like a relief after the heavy, constricting wedding gown. She sat by the fire, staring into the flames, her mind replaying the events of the day, the wedding ceremony, Master Gareth's warning, Aldrich's inscrutable gaze. She knew she had to act, to find a way to uncover the truth, to protect her father. But how? She was surrounded by Aldrich's men, his loyal retainers, and she had no one she could trust. She thought of Master Gareth, of his unwavering loyalty to her father. He was her only hope, her only ally in this dangerous game. She had to find a way to contact him, to send him a message, to seek his guidance. She rose and went to the window, looking out at the courtyard below. The moon, a sliver of silver in the inky sky, cast long, dancing shadows on the stone walls. She saw a guard patrolling the courtyard, his footsteps echoing in the silence. An idea sparked in her mind. The guards changed shifts at midnight. She had overheard one of the ladies in waiting mentioning it earlier in the day. If she could somehow intercept the new guard, perhaps she could bribe him, persuade him to carry a message to Master Gareth. It was a risky plan, fraught with danger. If she was caught, the consequences would be severe. But she had no other choice. She had to try. She waited patiently, watching the clock, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. As the hour approached midnight, she heard the sound of footsteps in the corridor outside her chambers. The guards were changing shifts. She quickly donned a dark cloak, concealing her nightgown, and slipped out of her chambers, moving silently through the dimly lit corridors. She reached the courtyard just as the new guard was taking his position. He was a young man, barely older than herself, his face etched with a mixture of boredom and apprehension. Isolde approached him cautiously, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Guard," she said, her voice a low whisper. "I need your help." The guard looked at her, startled, his hand instinctively going to the hilt of his sword. "My lady?" he said, his voice questioning. "What are you doing here? It is not safe for you to be out at this hour." Isolde held up a hand, silencing him. "I know it is not safe," she said, her voice urgent. "But this is a matter of life and death. My father's life." She reached into her cloak and pulled out a small pouch filled with gold coins, a portion of the wealth she had brought with her from Ashenmere. "I will pay you handsomely," she said, offering him the pouch, "if you will carry a message for me. A message to Master Gareth at Ashenmere." The guard hesitated, his eyes flickering between Isolde and the pouch of gold. He was clearly tempted, but also afraid. "My lady," he said, his voice trembling, "I cannot. Sir Aldrich's orders are strict. No one is to leave or enter the castle without his permission." "This is more important than Sir Aldrich's orders," Isolde insisted, her voice desperate. "My father is innocent. He is being framed. This message, it could save his life." She saw a flicker of doubt in the guard's eyes, a hint of sympathy. She pressed her advantage. "Please," she pleaded. "I am begging you. Have you no loyalty to Lord Elric? He was a good and just lord. He would never betray the king." The guard looked down, his face conflicted. He knew the truth of Isolde's words. Lord Elric was a respected man, loved by his people. The accusations against him were hard to believe. Finally, he looked up, his eyes meeting Isolde's. "Give me the message," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "And the gold. I will do what I can." Isolde's heart leaped with relief. She quickly wrote a brief message to Master Gareth, detailing her suspicions, urging him to investigate Aldrich's actions, to find proof of her father's innocence. She sealed the message with a drop of wax from a candle and handed it to the guard, along with the pouch of gold. "Thank you," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "You are a brave man. You may have just saved my father's life." The guard nodded, his face grim. "I will leave at first light," he said. "Pray that I am not caught." Isolde watched him go, her heart filled with a mixture of hope and fear. She had taken a risk, a desperate gamble. But she had done what she had to do. She had paid the price of loyalty, and now she could only wait and pray that her gamble would pay off. The fate of her father, and perhaps her own, rested on the shoulders of a young, uncertain guard, and a message carried on the wings of hope across the dangerous miles to Ashenmere. Chapter 9. Beneath the Gilded Cage. The following days settled into an uneasy routine. Isolde played the part of the dutiful wife, attending to Aldrich's needs, managing the household, and enduring the watchful eyes of the court. She learned the rhythms of Blackwood Keep, the routines of its inhabitants, the secrets whispered in its shadowed corners. She discovered that Aldrich, despite his cold exterior, was a surprisingly efficient and organized lord. He oversaw every aspect of the keep's operation, from the training of the guards to the management of the kitchens, with a meticulous attention to detail. He was respected by his men, feared by his enemies, and obeyed without question. But Isolde also sensed a darkness beneath his controlled facade, a hidden depth that she could not quite fathom. She often caught him staring at her, his dark eyes intense, probing, as if he were trying to unravel the secrets she held within. She, in turn, continued to observe him, watching for any slip, any clue that might confirm her suspicions. She questioned the servants, subtly probing for information about Aldrich's past, his dealings with the king, his involvement in the council investigating her father. But the servants were tight-lipped, loyal to their lord, and unwilling to betray any confidences. Isolde realized that she was walking a tightrope, balancing her need for information with the danger of exposing her own distrust. One evening, as she was sitting in the great hall, listening to Aldrich discuss matters of state with his advisors, she noticed a small, locked chest tucked away in a corner. It was an unassuming chest, made of dark wood, bound with iron, but something about it caught her attention. It seemed out of place, hidden, as if it contained something of great value, or great secrecy. She waited until the hall was empty, then approached the chest, her heart pounding with a mixture of curiosity and trepidation. She tried the lock, but it was firmly secured. She needed a key. She searched Aldrich's chambers, carefully, discreetly, while he was away attending to his duties. She looked through his desk, his wardrobe, his personal belongings, but found nothing. She was about to give up when she noticed a small, silver chain around Aldrich's neck, partially hidden beneath his tunic. She had seen it before, but had never paid it much attention. Now she wondered if it might hold the key to the chest. She knew it was a dangerous gamble, a violation of his privacy, but she was desperate. She had to find out what was in that chest. The next day, while Aldrich was bathing, Isolde, with trembling hands, crept into his chambers. She found him in the large, stone bathing chamber, submerged in a steaming tub, his eyes closed, his body relaxed. She approached cautiously, her heart hammering against her ribs. She reached out and gently lifted the chain from around his neck, careful not to disturb him. Attached to the chain was a small, silver key. She quickly replaced the chain, her hands shaking, and slipped out of the chamber, the key clutched tightly in her hand. She returned to the great hall, her heart pounding with anticipation. She knelt before the chest, inserted the key into the lock, and turned. The lock clicked open. With trembling hands, she lifted the lid. Inside, she found a collection of documents, letters, and scrolls, neatly organized and tied with ribbons. She began to read, her eyes scanning the pages, her heart sinking with each word. The documents revealed a web of deceit, of betrayal, of conspiracy. They confirmed her worst fears. Aldrich was not investigating her father's case.
He was orchestrating it.
He had fabricated the evidence, bribed the witnesses, manipulated the council. He was the one who had accused her father of treason, the one who had engineered his downfall. And the reason?
Power. Land.
Control. Aldrich had long coveted Ashenmere, its strategic location, its wealth, its influence. He had used Isolde, her father's predicament, to achieve his goals. Isolde felt a surge of rage, of betrayal, of despair. She had been a fool, a pawn in his game. She had trusted him, had married him, had given herself to him, and he had used her, manipulated her, betrayed her. But amidst the rage, there was also a flicker of hope. She had the proof. She had the evidence she needed to expose him, to clear her father's name. But how to use it? She couldn't simply present it to the king. Aldrich had allies in the court, powerful men who would protect him, who would discredit her, who would silence her. She needed a plan, a way to expose Aldrich's treachery without putting herself, or her father, in even greater danger. She needed to find someone she could trust, someone powerful enough to challenge Aldrich, someone who would believe her. She closed the chest, locked it, and returned the key to its hiding place. She had to be careful. She had to be patient. She had to play the part of the dutiful wife, while secretly plotting her revenge, her escape, her father's salvation. She had walked into the wolf's lair, and she had been bitten. But she was not defeated. She was wounded, but not broken. She would use his own treachery against him. She would find a way to bring him down, to reclaim her life, her honor, her father's freedom. The gilded cage was crumbling, and she would be the one to shatter it. The truth was a weapon, and she was ready to wield it. Chapter 10. The Lion's Roar. Isolde knew she needed an ally, someone powerful and influential, someone beyond Aldrich's reach. Her thoughts turned to Duke Morian, a nobleman known for his unwavering loyalty to the king and his fierce opposition to corruption. He was a lion of a man, renowned for his courage, his integrity, and his booming voice that could shake the very foundations of the court. He was also, Isolde had heard, a long-standing rival of Aldrich Blackwell. Reaching the Duke, however, was a challenge. He resided in his own fortified estate, far from Blackwood Keep, and Isolde was effectively a prisoner, constantly under Aldrich's watchful eye. She needed a messenger, someone she could trust implicitly, someone who could travel undetected. Her thoughts returned to the young guard who had carried her message to Master Gareth. He had proven his loyalty, his courage, and his discretion. She had to find him again. She learned, through careful questioning of the servants, that the guard's name was Thomas, and that he was often assigned to duty in the castle gardens. She began to frequent the gardens, taking solitary walks, hoping to encounter him. One afternoon, as she was walking along a secluded path, she saw him. He was tending to the rose bushes, his back to her. She approached him cautiously, her heart pounding with a mixture of hope and fear. "Thomas," she whispered, her voice barely audible. He turned, startled, his hand instinctively going to the hilt of his sword. When he saw it was Isolde, he relaxed slightly, but his expression remained wary. "My lady," he said, his voice low, "you should not be here. It is dangerous." "I know," Isolde said, her voice urgent, "but I need your help again. It is even more important than before." She quickly explained her situation, her discovery of Aldrich's treachery, her need to reach Duke Morian. She offered him another pouch of gold, a substantial sum, enough to secure his future. Thomas hesitated, his face conflicted. He knew the risks. If he was caught, he would face Aldrich's wrath, and it would be merciless. "My lady," he said, his voice trembling, "this is treason." "If Sir Aldrich finds out, he will not find out," Isolde insisted, her voice firm. "You are discreet. You are loyal. And you're the only one I can trust." She saw a flicker of determination in his eyes, a spark of courage. He was a young man, but he had a good heart and a sense of justice. "Give me the message," he said finally, his voice resolute. "And the gold. I will do what I can." Isolde's heart leaped with relief. She quickly wrote a detailed letter to Duke Morian, outlining Aldrich's treachery, providing the evidence she had found, and pleading for his intervention. She sealed the message with her father's signet ring, a symbol of her authority, a plea for his trust. She handed the letter to Thomas, along with the pouch of gold. "Thank you," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "You are risking your life for me, for my father. I will never forget it." Thomas nodded, his face grim. "I will leave tonight," he said. "I will travel by night, and hide by day. I will reach Duke Morian, I swear it." Isolde watched him go, her heart filled with a mixture of hope and fear. She had set her plan in motion, a desperate gamble to expose Aldrich and save her father. The following days were a torment of waiting, of uncertainty. Isolde played the part of the dutiful wife, concealing her true feelings, her hidden agenda. She endured Aldrich's presence, his touch, his watchful gaze, while secretly praying for Thomas to succeed, for Duke Morian to believe her, for justice to prevail. One evening, as she was dining with Aldrich in the great hall, a messenger arrived, bearing the royal seal. Aldrich took the message, read it, and his expression darkened. "The king summons me to court," he said, his voice cold. Immediately, Isolde's heart leaped. Could it be? Had Thomas reached Duke Morian? Had the Duke acted? Aldrich rose from the table, his face a mask of anger and suspicion. "I do not know what this is about," he said, his eyes narrowing as he looked at Isolde. "But if you have had anything to do with it," he didn't finish the threat, but the implication was clear. Isolde met his gaze, her expression carefully neutral. "I have no idea what this is about, my lord," she said, her voice steady. "I have been here at Blackwood Keep, as you know." He studied her for a long moment, his eyes searching for any sign of deceit. But Isolde had learned to control her emotions, to mask her true feelings. She was a skilled actress now, playing the role of the innocent wife. He turned and left the hall, his footsteps echoing in the silence. Isolde watched him go, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and anticipation. The lion had roared. The game was afoot, and Isolde was no longer a pawn. She was a player, and she was ready to fight. The summons was a roar, but it was not hers. The true test, the true roar, was yet to come. She just hoped she was ready, this time, for its repercussions. Chapter 11. Echoes of the Fallen. Aldrich's absence was a palpable relief. The air in Blackwood Keep seemed lighter, the shadows less menacing. Isolde moved with a newfound freedom, her steps no longer hesitant, her gaze no longer downcast. She was still a prisoner, in a sense, but the jailer was gone, and the door to her cage was slightly ajar. She spent her days exploring the keep, familiarizing herself with its layout, its secrets, its hidden passages. She discovered a small, neglected chapel, tucked away in a remote corner of the castle. It was a dusty, forgotten place, but it offered her a sanctuary, a place where she could pray, where she could think, where she could plan. She also spent time with the servants, talking to them, listening to their stories, earning their trust. She learned about their lives, their families, their hopes, and their fears. She discovered that many of them harbored a secret resentment towards Aldrich, a fear of his harsh rule, a longing for the days when Lord Elric had governed Ashenmere with kindness and justice. She began to cultivate these feelings, subtly planting seeds of doubt, of dissent, of rebellion. She spoke of her father's innocence, of Aldrich's treachery, of the need for justice. She did not incite them to violence, but she encouraged them to question, to resist, to hope for a better future. She also continued to search for more information, for any further evidence that might strengthen her case against Aldrich. She discovered a hidden room, behind a tapestry in the library, a room that had once belonged to Aldrich's father, a man who had died under mysterious circumstances. In the room, she found a collection of old journals, letters, and documents. She began to read, piecing together the story of Aldrich's past, his family's history, the secrets that had shaped him. She discovered that Aldrich's father had been a cruel and ambitious man, a man who had lusted after power and wealth. He had been involved in a number of shady dealings, had made many enemies, and had ultimately met a violent end. She also learned that Aldrich's mother had been a gentle and kind woman, a woman who had suffered greatly under her husband's tyranny. She had died young, broken-hearted, leaving Aldrich to be raised by his ruthless father. Isolde began to understand Aldrich, to see him not just as a villain, but as a product of his past, a victim of his upbringing. She saw the echoes of his fallen father in his actions, in his ambition, in his ruthlessness. But she also saw a flicker of something else, a hint of the mother he had lost, a longing for something more, something better. This realization did not excuse his actions, did not diminish her determination to expose him, but it gave her a new perspective, a deeper understanding of her enemy. It also gave her a new weapon. She knew that Aldrich was haunted by his past, by the ghosts of his parents, by the secrets he carried within. She could use this against him, exploit his vulnerabilities, his fears, his doubts. She continued to wait for news from Duke Morian, her hope dwindling with each passing day. She began to fear that Thomas had been caught, that her message had never reached its destination, that her plan had failed. One evening, as she was sitting in the chapel, praying for a miracle, she heard a noise. She turned and saw a figure standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the dim light of the corridor. It was Master Gareth. Isolde's heart leaped with joy and relief. He had made it. He had returned. "Master Gareth," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "You're alive." He stepped into the chapel, his face grim, his clothes travel-stained. "My lady," he said, his voice low, "I have news." "From Duke Morian." Isolde held her breath, her heart pounding. "Tell me," she said, her voice urgent. "The Duke received your message," Master Gareth said. "He believes you. He has presented the evidence to the king." Isolde felt a surge of hope, of triumph.
Her plan had worked. And?
She asked, her voice trembling. "The king has summoned Aldrich to court," Master Gareth said, "to answer the charges. He is to stand trial." Isolde closed her eyes, a wave of relief washing over her. Aldrich's reign of terror was about to end. Her father would be freed. Justice would prevail. But her relief was short-lived. Master Gareth continued, his voice grave.
But there is more, my lady.
Aldrich, he knows. He knows it was you. He knows about the guard, about the message, about everything. Isolde's blood ran cold.
How?
She whispered. He has spies, Master Gareth said. Everywhere. Even in Duke Morian's household.
He was warned.
He is preparing to flee. Isolde's mind raced. Flee? Where?
How?
She had to stop him. She had to prevent him from escaping justice. We must warn the king, she said, her voice urgent. We must alert the guards. We must. It is too late, Master Gareth interrupted, his voice grim. Aldrich has already left. He took a small contingent of his most loyal men. He is heading for the border. Isolde felt a surge of despair. He was going to get away. All her efforts, all her risks, had been in vain. But then, she remembered something. The hidden room, Aldrich's father's journals, the secrets she had uncovered. She had a weapon she could use to track him down, to bring him to justice. I know where he is going, she said, her voice firm. I know his plan, and I know how to stop him. The echoes of the fallen would now guide her, not to repeat their mistakes, but to correct them. She would follow the echoes, and they would lead her to Aldrich. Chapter 12. A Dance of Deception. Isolde's revelation was met with a mixture of surprise and skepticism from Master Gareth. He had served her father loyally for years, and he trusted her judgment, but her claim to know Aldrich's secret escape route seemed almost fantastical. My lady, he said, his voice laced with doubt, how can you be so sure? Aldrich is a cunning man. He would not leave any trace of his plans. He did, Isolde insisted, her voice firm. He left it in his father's journals. In the hidden room, behind the tapestry in the library. She explained her discovery. The details of Aldrich's father's past, his secret dealings, his escape route, a hidden passage that led from Blackwood Keep to a remote coastal village, a place where smugglers and pirates often gathered. Aldrich plans to take a ship, Isolde said. To flee the kingdom, to escape justice. He believes he is following in his father's footsteps, repeating his success. But he is wrong. He is repeating his mistakes. Master Gareth listened intently, his initial skepticism gradually giving way to a grudging respect. He saw the determination in Isolde's eyes, the fire in her spirit. He knew she was not lying. We must act quickly, Isolde said. We must gather a small force, loyal men, and follow him. We must intercept him before he reaches the coast. Master Gareth nodded, his face grim. I know a few men we can trust, he said. Men who served your father, men who resent Aldrich's rule. We will leave at once. They gathered a small band of loyal retainers, men who had been secretly harboring their resentment towards Aldrich, waiting for an opportunity to rebel. They armed themselves, gathered supplies, and prepared to leave Blackwood Keep, under the cover of darkness. But before they could depart, they were confronted by Lady Annalise, the king's treacherous cousin, the woman who had planted the seeds of doubt in Isolde's mind. She stood in the courtyard, blocking their path, her eyes glittering with malice. Going somewhere, Lady Isolde? She said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Without your husband's permission? How unconventional. Isolde met her gaze, her expression cold. This is none of your concern, Lady Annalise, she said, her voice firm. Annalise laughed, a light, tinkling sound that was utterly devoid of mirth. Oh, but it is, my dear. Because I know your little secret. I know about your treachery. And I intend to inform Sir Aldrich. Isolde's heart sank. Annalise had been spying on her, watching her, waiting for an opportunity to betray her. She had underestimated her enemy. You will do no such thing, Isolde said, her voice unwavering. Aldrich is a traitor. He is fleeing justice. And you are his accomplice. Annalise smiled, a sly, knowing smile. Perhaps, she said. But who will believe you? The daughter of an accused traitor, accusing the Knight of Blackwood?
It is your word against mine.
And my word carries more weight in this court. Isolde knew she was right. Annalise was a powerful woman, with connections, with influence. She could easily discredit Isolde, silence her, have her imprisoned. But Isolde was not defeated. She had one last card to play, a desperate gamble, a dance of deception. "You are mistaken, Lady Annalise," Isolde said, her voice calm, her expression carefully neutral. "I am not accusing Aldrich. I am protecting him." Annalise's smile faltered, her eyes narrowing with suspicion. "Protecting him?" she said, her voice questioning.
What are you talking about?
"I have discovered a plot," Isolde said, her voice low, conspiratorial. "A plot to assassinate Aldrich. A plot orchestrated by Duke Morian." Annalise's eyes widened, her face paling. She knew of the rivalry between Aldrich and Duke Morian, of the bad blood between them. She knew that such a plot was possible. "Duke Morian?" she said, her voice trembling.
But why?
"He envies Aldrich's power," Isolde said, her voice convincing. "His influence. He seeks to eliminate him, to take his place. And he has used my father's situation to achieve his goals." She paused, letting her words sink in. "I have learned of this plot," she continued, "and I am going to warn Aldrich. To save him. To protect him from Duke Morian's treachery." Annalise was silent, her mind racing, her loyalties torn. She hated Aldrich, but she hated Duke Morian even more. She saw an opportunity, a chance to gain favor with the king, to expose the Duke's treachery, to advance her own ambitions. I believe you," she said finally, her voice hesitant. "But what can I do?" "Help me," Isolde said, her voice urgent. "Help me reach Aldrich. Help me warn him. Together we can expose Duke Morian's plot and save Aldrich's life." Annalise nodded, her face determined.
"I will," she said.
"I will help you. I know a secret passage, a way out of the castle, undetected. Follow me." Isolde and Master Gareth exchanged a glance, a flicker of understanding passing between them. Isolde had played her cards perfectly. She had used Annalise's ambition, her hatred, her treachery, against her. She had turned her enemy into an ally, a pawn in her own game. They followed Annalise through the secret passage, a dark, winding tunnel that led them out of the castle, beyond the walls, into the surrounding forest. As they emerged from the passage, Isolde turned to Annalise, her expression cold. "Thank you, Lady Annalise," she said, her voice devoid of any gratitude. "You have been most helpful." Annalise looked at her, confused, her eyes widening with realization. You tricked me," she said, her voice trembling. "You lied to me." "Indeed," Isolde said, her voice firm. "And now you will be silent, or you will face the consequences of your own treachery." She turned and walked away, leaving Annalise standing there, alone, betrayed, defeated. The dance of deception was over, and Isolde had won. But the true battle, the confrontation with Aldrich, was yet to come. She had outwitted one enemy, but the most dangerous one still awaited her. The passage led to freedom, but freedom was a dangerous path, especially when pursued by a wolf. Chapter 13. The Wolf's Embrace. The journey to the coast was arduous, the terrain rough, the weather unforgiving. Isolde, Master Gareth, and their small band of loyal retainers traveled by night, hiding by day, avoiding the main roads, sticking to the hidden paths, the forgotten trails. Isolde pushed herself relentlessly, driven by a fierce determination to reach Aldrich before he escaped, to bring him to justice, to save her father. She endured the cold, the hunger, the exhaustion, her spirit unwavering, her resolve unyielding. She thought of her father, of his unwavering belief in her, of his love, of his sacrifice. She thought of the injustice he had suffered, of the lies that had been spun around him, of the danger he was still in. She would not fail him. She would not let him down. She also thought of Aldrich, of the man she had married, the man who had betrayed her, the man who had used her, the man who was now fleeing justice. She felt a mixture of anger, resentment, and a strange, unsettling flicker of something else. Pity, perhaps? Understanding? She had seen the darkness in him, the echoes of his fallen father, but she had also glimpsed the vulnerability, the longing for something more, something better. She knew he was a dangerous man, a ruthless man, a man capable of anything. But she was no longer afraid of him. She had faced him before, had bargained with him, had married him. She had learned his secrets, had understood his weaknesses, had exploited his vulnerabilities. She would face him again, and this time, she would be the victor. They reached the coastal village, a small, desolate place, shrouded in mist, the air thick with the smell of salt and fish. It was a haven for smugglers, for pirates, for outlaws, a place where the law held little sway. Isolde learned, through discreet inquiries, that a ship was preparing to sail, a ship that had been chartered by a wealthy nobleman, a man matching Aldrich's description. The ship was due to depart at dawn. They had arrived just in time. Isolde and her men concealed themselves in the shadows, waiting for Aldrich to appear. They watched the ship, the crew making their final preparations, the cargo being loaded, the passengers boarding. As the first rays of dawn pierced the mist, a figure emerged from the darkness, a tall, imposing figure, clad in black, his face hidden by the shadows of his hood. It was Aldrich. He was accompanied by a handful of his most loyal men, heavily armed, their faces grim, their eyes watchful. They were ready for a fight. Isolde stepped out of the shadows, confronting him, her small band of retainers at her side. "Aldrich," she said, her voice clear and strong, echoing in the stillness of the dawn. He stopped, startled, his hand going to the hilt of his sword. He recognized her voice, her silhouette, even in the dim light. "Isolde?" he said, his voice questioning, disbelieving. "What are you doing here?" "I have come to stop you," she said, her voice unwavering. "To bring you to justice. To answer for your crimes." He laughed, a cold, harsh sound that sent a shiver down her spine. "You?" he said, his voice mocking. "You think you can stop me? You are a woman, alone, outnumbered." "I am not alone," Isolde said, her voice firm. "And I am not afraid of you." She gestured to her men, to Master Gareth, to the loyal retainers who stood beside her, their faces grim, their weapons drawn. "These men are loyal to my father," she said. "To the truth. To justice. They will fight for me. They will fight for what is right." Aldrich's eyes narrowed, his gaze shifting between Isolde and her men. He saw the determination in their faces, the fire in their eyes. He realized he had underestimated her, underestimated them. "You are a fool, Isolde," he said, his voice cold. "You cannot win. I have powerful allies. I have resources. I will escape. And you will pay for your interference." "Perhaps," Isolde said, her voice calm. "But I will not let you go. I will not let you escape justice. I will fight you, to the death if necessary." She drew her own weapon, a small, silver dagger, a gift from her father, a symbol of his love, of his belief in her strength. It was not a weapon designed for battle, but it was all she had. And she would use it, if necessary, to defend herself, to defend her father's honor, to defend the truth. Aldrich looked at her, his dark eyes filled with a mixture of anger, hatred, and something else. Respect, perhaps? Admiration? He saw the fire in her spirit, the courage in her heart, the unwavering resolve in her gaze. He saw the woman he had married, the woman he had betrayed, the woman who was now his enemy. He drew his own sword, a long, gleaming blade, the weapon of a warrior, a symbol of his power, of his ruthlessness. "So be it," he said, his voice a low growl. "If it is a fight you want, Isolde, then it is a fight you shall have." He lunged at her, his sword flashing in the dim light, the clash of steel echoing in the stillness of the dawn. The battle had begun. The wolf and the falcon, locked in a deadly embrace, their fates intertwined, their destinies uncertain. The embrace was not one of love, but of conflict, of a final reckoning. And in that embrace, only one could survive. Chapter 14. Scars of the Past. The fight was brutal, swift, and merciless. Aldrich, a skilled warrior, trained in the art of combat, fought with a ferocity born of desperation and rage. Isolde, despite her lack of training, fought with a courage fueled by her love for her father, her thirst for justice, and her determination to survive. She parried his blows, dodging his attacks, using her agility, her quickness, to evade his superior strength. She was not a warrior, but she was a survivor, and she would not yield, would not surrender, would not be defeated. Master Gareth and her loyal retainers engaged Aldrich's men. The clash of steel, the grunts of exertion, the cries of pain, filling the air. It was a chaotic melee, a desperate struggle, a battle for survival. Isolde saw an opening, a flicker of vulnerability in Aldrich's defense. She lunged, her small silver dagger aimed at his heart. But he was too quick, too skilled. He deflected her blow, the dagger glancing off his armor, leaving only a superficial scratch. He struck back, his sword a blur of motion, forcing her to retreat, to defend herself. She felt a sharp pain in her arm, a burning sensation, as his blade grazed her flesh. She ignored the pain, focusing on her defense, on her survival. She saw Master Gareth fall, struck down by one of Aldrich's men. Her heart leaped with fear, with grief, but she could not stop, could not falter. She had to keep fighting. She saw Aldrich's eyes, his dark, intense gaze, fixed on her. She saw the anger, the hatred, but she also saw something else. A flicker of pain, of regret, of sadness. She remembered the hidden room, the journals, the secrets of his past, the echoes of his fallen parents. She saw the boy he had been, the victim of his father's cruelty, the child who had lost his mother, the man who had been shaped by violence, by betrayal, by loss. She understood him, in that moment, not as a villain, but as a human being, flawed, broken, scarred by the past. And she felt a pang of pity, of compassion, even as she fought for her life. But she could not let her compassion weaken her resolve. She had to stop him, had to bring him to justice. She had to end this cycle of violence, of betrayal, of loss. She feinted, drawing his attention, creating an opening. She lunged again, her dagger aimed not at his heart, but at his sword hand. This time, she struck true. Her dagger pierced his flesh, severing tendons, crippling his grip. His sword clattered to the ground, useless. He staggered back, his face contorted in pain, his eyes filled with disbelief, with rage, with defeat. He was disarmed, vulnerable, at her mercy. Isolde stood before him, her dagger raised, her arm trembling, her heart pounding. She could kill him. She could end his life, avenge her father, achieve her revenge. But she hesitated. She looked into his eyes, and she saw not a monster, but a man, a broken man, a man scarred by the past. She could not do it. She could not take his life. She could not become like him, a creature of violence, of revenge, of hatred. She lowered her dagger, her hand shaking, her voice trembling. "It is over, Aldrich," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Surrender. Face justice. Atone for your crimes." He looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of surprise, confusion, and gratitude. He saw the compassion in her gaze, the mercy in her heart, the strength in her spirit. He had expected her to kill him, to exact her revenge. But she had spared him. She had shown him mercy, a mercy he did not deserve. He slowly knelt, his head bowed, his body shaking. He was defeated, not by her strength, but by her compassion, by her refusal to become like him. I surrender," he said, his voice choked with emotion.
I confess.
"I am guilty." Isolde's men surrounded him, securing him, binding his wounds. The battle was over. The wolf had been subdued, not by force, but by grace. Isolde watched him, her heart filled with a mixture of relief, sadness, and a strange, unsettling sense of loss. She had won, had achieved her goal, had saved her father. But she had also lost something, a part of herself, a part of her innocence, a part of her dreams. The scars of the past, both hers and Aldrich's, would remain, a constant reminder of the battle they had fought, of the choices they had made, of the price they had paid. But perhaps, from those scars, a new beginning could emerge, a new hope, a new future. The dawn was breaking, casting a pale light on the scene, illuminating the wreckage of the battle, but also, perhaps, revealing a path towards healing, towards redemption, towards peace. She had spared his life. Now, she had to face the consequences, both for herself and for the kingdom. Chapter 15. The Unveiling Storm. The return to court was a somber procession. Aldrich, bound and guarded, walked with a defeated slump, his usual arrogance replaced by a haunted resignation. Isolde, despite her victory, felt no triumph, only a weary relief and a lingering sadness for the tangled web of ambition and betrayal that had led them to this point. The king, upon hearing of Aldrich's capture and confession, was initially incredulous. He had trusted Aldrich, had relied on his counsel, had considered him a valuable asset to the crown. The revelation of his treachery was a blow to his pride, to his judgment, to his faith in his own court. He summoned Isolde to a private audience, demanding a full accounting of the events. She recounted her story, from the initial accusation against her father to her desperate bargain with Aldrich, to her discovery of his treachery, to her perilous journey to the coast. She presented the evidence she had found, the documents from Aldrich's father's hidden room, the testimony of Master Gareth and her loyal retainers. The king listened intently, his face a mask of conflicting emotions: anger, disbelief, regret, and a grudging respect for Isolde's courage and resourcefulness. He questioned her closely, probing for any inconsistencies, any flaws in her story. But Isolde held firm, her truth unwavering, her evidence irrefutable. Finally, the king sighed, a deep, weary sound that echoed in the silence of the chamber. "You have done a great service to the crown, Lady Isolde," he said, his voice grave. "You have exposed a traitor, a viper in our midst. You have saved your father's life, and you have, perhaps, saved the kingdom from a far greater threat." He paused, his gaze shifting to the window, where a storm was gathering, the sky darkening, the wind howling. "But your actions, they have consequences," he continued. "You have defied your husband, you have broken your vows, you have challenged the established order." Isolde met his gaze, her chin lifted in defiance. "I did what I had to do, Your Majesty," she said, her voice firm. "I acted out of loyalty, out of love, out of a sense of justice. I would do it again, if necessary." The king nodded, a flicker of admiration in his eyes. "I believe you," he said. "But the court, it will not be so understanding. There will be whispers, there will be accusations, there will be demands for punishment." Isolde knew this to be true. She had violated the sacred bonds of marriage, had challenged the authority of a powerful nobleman, had upset the delicate balance of power within the court. She had made enemies, powerful enemies, who would seek to see her punished, to see her disgraced. "I am prepared to face the consequences, Your Majesty," she said, her voice unwavering. "I have done what is right, and I will not apologize for it." The king studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "You are a remarkable woman, Lady Isolde," he said finally. "A woman of courage, of strength, of integrity. You remind me of your father." He paused again, then turned his gaze back to the gathering storm. "I will convene a royal council," he said, "to determine your fate and Aldrich's. The law must be followed. Justice must be served. But I will ensure that your voice is heard, that your actions are understood." The royal council was a grand, formal affair, held in the great hall of the castle. The entire court was in attendance, their faces a mixture of curiosity, apprehension, and malice. Aldrich was brought before the council, his hands bound, his head bowed. He was a shadow of his former self, his arrogance gone, his power stripped away. Isolde stood beside him, her head held high, her gaze unwavering. She was no longer the frightened, naive girl who had arrived at court a few months ago. She was a woman, forged in the fires of adversity, tempered by betrayal, strengthened by her own courage. The charges against Aldrich were read, a long list of crimes, of treachery, of conspiracy. He offered no defense, simply confessing to his guilt, accepting his fate. Then it was Isolde's turn. She was accused of defying her husband, of breaking her vows, of consorting with traitors, of usurping the authority of the crown. She defended herself, calmly, eloquently, recounting her story, presenting her evidence, explaining her actions. She spoke of her love for her father, of her desperation to save him, of her discovery of Aldrich's treachery, of her duty to expose him, to bring him to justice. She spoke of the choices she had made, of the risks she had taken, of the sacrifices she had endured. She spoke of the price of loyalty, of the cost of truth, of the burden of justice. The council listened, some with skepticism, some with hostility, some with a grudging admiration. The whispers began, the accusations, the demands for punishment. But then, a voice rose above the clamor, a voice that commanded attention, a voice that spoke with authority, with integrity, with power. It was Duke Morian. He stepped forward, his tall, imposing figure dominating the hall, his voice booming, echoing through the chamber. "I have heard Lady Isolde's testimony," he said, "and I believe her. I have seen the evidence she has presented, and it is irrefutable. Aldrich Blackwell is a traitor, and he deserves to be punished. But Lady Isolde, she is no traitor. She is a heroine." He recounted his own involvement, his receipt of Isolde's message, his presentation of the evidence to the king, his belief in her innocence. He spoke of her courage, her resourcefulness, her unwavering loyalty to her father, to the truth, to justice. "She has done what any of us would have done in her situation," he said. "She has acted with honor, with integrity, with a fierce and unwavering love. She deserves our praise, our gratitude, not our condemnation." His words silenced the whispers, quelled the accusations, shifted the mood of the council. He was a respected nobleman, a man of unwavering loyalty to the king, a man whose word carried weight. The king, who had remained silent throughout the proceedings, finally spoke. "I have heard the council," he said, his voice grave, "and I have made my decision." He looked at Aldrich, his expression cold, unforgiving. "Aldrich Blackwell," he said, "you are guilty of treason, of conspiracy, of a multitude of crimes. You are stripped of your titles, your lands, your possessions. You are sentenced to life imprisonment." He then turned to Isolde, his gaze softening, a flicker of warmth in his eyes. "Lady Isolde," he said, "you have acted with courage, with integrity, with a fierce and unwavering love. You have saved your father's life, and you have exposed a dangerous threat to the crown. You are exonerated. You are free." A collective gasp went through the hall, a mixture of surprise, relief, and approval. Isolde's gamble had paid off. Justice had prevailed. The storm outside, which had been raging throughout the proceedings, suddenly subsided. The clouds parted, revealing a sliver of blue sky, a ray of sunlight piercing through the darkness. It was a sign, a symbol of hope, of a new beginning, of a brighter future. The unveiling was complete. The storm had passed, and Isolde stood, bathed in the light, vindicated, free. Chapter 16. Flames of Rebellion. Isolde's exoneration was a victory, but it was not the end of her struggles. The court remained a viper's nest of intrigue and ambition, and she had made powerful enemies. Lady Annalise, in particular, still harbored resentment and sought revenge for Isolde's deception. She spread rumors, whispered accusations, and attempted to undermine Isolde's standing with the king. However, Isolde had also gained allies. Duke Morian remained her staunch supporter, and many of the courtiers, impressed by her courage and integrity, now viewed her with respect. More importantly, her father, Lord Elric, had been released from house arrest and was slowly regaining his health and his influence. One evening, as Isolde and her father were walking in the castle gardens, they were approached by a group of men, cloaked and hooded, their faces hidden in shadow. Isolde's hand instinctively went to the small silver dagger she always carried, but her father held her back. "These men are friends, Isolde," he said, his voice low. "They are loyal to me, to Ashenmere, to the cause of justice." The men removed their hoods, revealing familiar faces: Master Gareth, Thomas the young guard, and several other retainers who had served Lord Elric for years. They were joined by a few new faces, men from other noble houses, men who had grown disillusioned with the king's rule, with the corruption and injustice that plagued the court. "My lord, my lady," Master Gareth said, bowing low, "we have come to offer our services. We are prepared to fight for you, to reclaim what is rightfully yours, to restore honor and justice to the kingdom." Lord Elric looked at Isolde, his eyes questioning. He knew that she had been instrumental in exposing Aldric's treachery, in saving his life, in securing his freedom. He also knew that she harbored a deep resentment towards the court, towards the king, towards the system that had allowed such injustice to flourish. "What do you say, Isolde?" he asked, his voice grave. "Shall we accept their offer? Shall we rebel?" Isolde hesitated. Rebellion was a dangerous path, fraught with risk, with uncertainty, with the potential for bloodshed and chaos. But she also knew that the kingdom was in desperate need of reform, that the king was weak and indecisive, that the court was riddled with corruption, that the people were suffering. She looked at the faces of the men before her, their eyes filled with hope, with determination, with a fierce loyalty to her father, to her, to the cause of justice. She saw the echoes of her own struggle, of her own fight for truth, of her own longing for a better future. "We have tried to work within the system," she said, her voice firm. "We have tried to seek justice through the proper channels. But we have been betrayed, deceived, manipulated. The system is broken. It cannot be fixed from within." She paused, her gaze sweeping over the faces of the men. "We have no choice," she continued. "We must fight. We must rebel. We must reclaim the kingdom." A murmur of approval ran through the group, a surge of determination, of unity, of purpose. They were ready to fight, to risk their lives, for a cause they believed in, for a leader they trusted. Lord Elric nodded, his face grim, but resolute. "Then it is decided," he said. "We will rebel. We will raise an army, gather allies, and challenge the king's authority. We will fight for a better future, for a just and honorable kingdom." The flames of rebellion had been ignited. Isolde, once a pawn in a dangerous game, was now a leader, a warrior, a champion of the people. She had found her purpose, her calling, her destiny. They began to plan their rebellion, secretly, cautiously, gathering support from other noble houses, recruiting soldiers, amassing weapons and supplies. They established a network of spies, informants, and messengers, spreading their message of hope, of resistance, of change. Isolde, drawing on her experiences at court, her knowledge of the king's weaknesses, her understanding of the political landscape, played a crucial role in the planning. She was a strategist, an advisor, a leader, guiding her father, inspiring her men, shaping the rebellion's course. One evening, as they were meeting in a hidden chamber beneath the castle, discussing their plans, a messenger arrived, bearing a sealed letter. The letter was from Lady Annalise. Isolde's heart sank. She knew that Annalise was her enemy, that she would betray them if she could. She opened the letter, her hands trembling, and read the contents. The letter was an offer of alliance. Annalise, disillusioned with the king, resentful of his weakness, and ambitious for power, proposed a joint rebellion. She offered her support, her resources, her influence, in exchange for a share of the spoils, a position of power in the new kingdom. Isolde was skeptical. She knew that Annalise was treacherous, that she could not be trusted. But she also knew that they needed allies, that they needed every advantage they could get. She presented the letter to her father, to Master Gareth, to the other leaders of the rebellion. They debated the offer, weighing the risks, the benefits, the potential for betrayal. Finally, Isolde spoke. "We cannot trust Annalise," she said. "But we can use her. We can accept her offer, temporarily, strategically, and then discard her when she is no longer useful." It was a ruthless decision, a cold calculation, but Isolde knew it was necessary. War was a dirty business, a game of deception, of manipulation, of betrayal. She had learned that lesson well. They accepted Annalise's offer, forming an uneasy alliance, a pact between enemies, a dance of deception. The rebellion was gaining momentum, fueled by discontent, by ambition, by a thirst for justice. The flames were spreading, threatening to consume the kingdom, to engulf the court, to topple the king. And Isolde, the falcon, was at the heart of the inferno, leading the charge, fighting for a better future, even if it meant embracing the darkness. The flames of rebellion had been ignited by a spark, but now they were a roaring inferno, and Isolde was at its center. Chapter 17. A Crown of Thorns. The rebellion gained momentum swiftly. Lord Elric, with his years of military experience and respected name, rallied the support of several powerful noble houses disillusioned with King Oberon's weak rule. Isolde, using her knowledge of courtly intrigue and her newfound allies, managed to sow further discord within the king's ranks, turning some of his advisors against him. Annalise, true to her nature, played a double game. While ostensibly supporting the rebellion, she secretly communicated with the king, hoping to betray Isolde and her father at the opportune moment and seize power for herself. Isolde, however, anticipated this treachery. She had Thomas, the young guard who had proven his loyalty time and again, intercept Annalise's messages, feeding her false information and keeping a close watch on her movements. The first major clash came at the Battle of Oakhaven, a strategically important town near Ashenmere. Lord Elric's forces, though outnumbered, fought with a fierce determination, fueled by their belief in their cause and their loyalty to their leader. Isolde, despite having no formal military training, proved to be a surprisingly effective strategist, advising her father on troop movements and tactics, drawing on her innate understanding of human nature and her ability to anticipate her enemy's actions. The battle raged for hours, a brutal and bloody affair. Master Gareth, fighting at Lord Elric's side, fell mortally wounded, protecting his lord from a surprise attack. Isolde, witnessing his fall, felt a surge of grief and rage, but she knew she could not falter. She rallied the troops, inspiring them with her courage and her unwavering determination. The tide of the battle turned when Annalise, believing the moment was ripe for her betrayal, ordered her forces to attack Lord Elric's flank. However, Isolde had anticipated this move. Thomas and his men, disguised as Annalise's soldiers, intercepted the order and instead launched a counterattack, turning the tables on Annalise and throwing her forces into disarray. The king's army, weakened by internal divisions and demoralized by Annalise's failed betrayal, was routed. Lord Elric emerged victorious, securing a crucial strategic advantage and bolstering the morale of his troops. Annalise was captured, her treachery exposed. Isolde, despite her anger and resentment, resisted the urge to execute her. She knew that killing Annalise would only create a martyr and further inflame the conflict. Instead, she had her imprisoned, stripping her of her titles and possessions, effectively neutralizing her as a threat. The victory at Oakhaven brought more noble houses to Lord Elric's banner, swelling his ranks and increasing his power. The rebellion was no longer a small uprising, it was a full-scale war, threatening to topple the king and reshape the kingdom. King Oberon, realizing the gravity of the situation, finally took decisive action. He gathered his remaining loyal forces, recalled his exiled generals, and prepared to make a final stand. He also sent a message to Isolde, offering a truce, a negotiation, a chance to end the bloodshed. Isolde, despite her father's objections, agreed to meet with the king. She knew that the war was taking a heavy toll on the kingdom, that the people were suffering, that the bloodshed had to stop. She also knew that the king, despite his weaknesses, was not a cruel or tyrannical man. He was simply misguided, manipulated by his advisors, trapped by his own indecisiveness. The meeting took place at a neutral location, a ruined monastery, a symbol of the kingdom's shattered peace. Isolde and the king, accompanied by a small escort, faced each other across a broken altar, the remnants of a shattered faith. Lady Isolde, the king said, his voice weary, his face etched with the burdens of rule. We have come to a crossroads. We can continue this war, this bloodshed, this destruction. Or we can find a way to peace. Isolde met his gaze, her expression firm but not hostile. Peace is what we all desire, Your Majesty, she said. But peace it must be built on justice, on truth, on a foundation of trust. She recounted the events that had led to the rebellion, the accusations against her father, Aldrich's treachery, the corruption of the court, the suffering of the people. She spoke of her own struggles, her own sacrifices, her own unwavering belief in a better future. The king listened, his head bowed, his eyes filled with regret. He did not deny her accusations, did not attempt to justify his actions. He simply acknowledged his mistakes, his failures, his weakness. I have been a poor king, Lady Isolde, he said finally, his voice choked with emotion. I have allowed myself to be manipulated, to be deceived, to be blinded by my own pride. He paused, then looked at her, his eyes pleading. But I am not beyond redemption, he continued. I am willing to make amends, to right the wrongs, to rebuild the kingdom. He offered her a crown, not the crown of the kingdom, but a smaller, simpler crown, a crown of thorns, a symbol of sacrifice, of repentance, of a new beginning. I offer you this crown, Lady Isolde, he said, not as a queen, but as a regent. Rule alongside me. Help me to rebuild the kingdom, to restore justice, to heal the wounds of this war. It was an unprecedented offer, a radical solution, a desperate attempt to save his kingdom, to save his throne, to save himself. Isolde hesitated. She had fought for justice, for truth, for a better future. She had rebelled against the king, had challenged his authority, had sought to overthrow him. But now he was offering her a chance to achieve her goals, not through violence, not through bloodshed, but through cooperation, through compromise, through peace. She looked at the crown of thorns, a symbol of suffering, of sacrifice, but also of hope, of redemption, of a new beginning. It was not the crown she had sought, not the power she had craved, but it was a chance to heal the kingdom, to rebuild the trust, to restore justice, to create a better future. She took the crown, her hand trembling, her heart filled with a mixture of trepidation and hope. I accept, Your Majesty, she said, her voice firm. I will rule alongside you. I will help you to rebuild the kingdom. I will wear this crown of thorns. The king smiled, a faint, weary smile, but a smile of relief, of gratitude, of hope. The war was over. The rebellion had ended. A new era had begun. And Isolde, the falcon, had found her perch, not on a throne of power, but on a seat of responsibility, of service, of sacrifice. The crown was not one of gold and jewels, but one of thorns and responsibility. And Isolde, the falcon, was ready to wear it. Chapter 18. The Heart's Reckoning. The transition was not easy. Many of the nobles who had supported Lord Elric's rebellion were wary of the king's offer, fearing a trap, a betrayal. They urged Isolde to depose Oberon, to claim the throne for herself, to establish a new dynasty. Isolde, however, remained steadfast in her commitment to the agreement. She knew that seizing the throne by force would only perpetuate the cycle of violence and instability. She believed in the king's sincerity, in his desire for redemption, in his willingness to change. She worked tirelessly to bridge the divide between the former rebels and the loyalists, to heal the wounds of the war, to rebuild trust and unity. She traveled throughout the kingdom, meeting with the people, listening to their concerns, addressing their grievances. She implemented reforms, rooting out corruption, establishing a fairer system of justice, and promoting economic recovery. The king, true to his word, supported her efforts, deferring to her judgment, empowering her to make decisions, and gradually relinquishing his own authority. He was a changed man, humbled by his failures, chastened by his experiences, and determined to make amends for his past mistakes. One of the most challenging tasks Isolde faced was the fate of Aldrich Blackwell. He remained imprisoned, awaiting trial, his future uncertain. Many called for his execution, demanding vengeance for his treachery, for his betrayal, for his crimes. Isolde, however, was torn. She had once loved Aldrich, had married him, had shared her life with him. She had also been betrayed by him, used by him, manipulated by him. She had every reason to hate him, to seek his destruction. But she also understood him in a way that no one else did. She had seen the darkness in him, the echoes of his fallen father, but she had also glimpsed the vulnerability, the longing for something more, something better. She knew that he was a complex man, a product of his past, a victim of his circumstances, as well as a perpetrator of his own crimes. She visited him in his prison cell, a small, dark, damp chamber, a stark contrast to the opulent surroundings he had once enjoyed. He was a shadow of his former self, his body thin and frail, his spirit broken, his eyes filled with a mixture of shame, regret, and a flicker of hope. "Isolde," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Why have you come?" "I came to understand," she said, her voice soft. "To understand why." He looked at her, his eyes searching hers, seeking forgiveness? Redemption? He knew he did not deserve it, but he still hoped for it, longed for it. He recounted his story, his childhood, his father's cruelty, his mother's death, his own ambition, his own descent into darkness. He spoke of his desire for power, for wealth, for control, of his belief that he could achieve his goals through any means necessary, of his willingness to sacrifice anyone, anything, to achieve his ambitions. He spoke of his marriage to Isolde, of his initial plan to use her, to manipulate her, to control her. But he also spoke of something else, something unexpected, something genuine. I fell in love with you, Isolde," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "Despite my plans, despite my intentions, despite myself. I saw your strength, your courage, your integrity, your goodness. And I wanted it. I wanted to be like you. I wanted to be worthy of you." But he had failed. He had betrayed her, had used her, had hurt her. He had destroyed any chance of happiness, of love, of redemption. Isolde listened, her heart aching, her tears flowing. She had once loved him, too. She had seen the potential in him, the possibility of something good, something beautiful. But he had chosen a different path, a path of darkness, of destruction, of despair. "I forgive you, Aldrich," she said finally, her voice trembling. "I forgive you for what you did. But I cannot forget. And I cannot undo the damage you have caused." He nodded, his head bowed, his tears falling. He understood. He accepted her forgiveness, but he also accepted his fate. Isolde left the prison cell, her heart heavy, her mind troubled. She knew what she had to do. She convened the royal council and presented her decision regarding Aldrich's fate. She acknowledged his crimes, his treachery, his betrayal. But she also spoke of his confession, his repentance, his humanity. "I cannot condone his actions," she said. "I cannot excuse his crimes. But I also cannot ignore his remorse, his willingness to accept responsibility, his potential for redemption." She proposed a sentence that was both just and merciful. She would not execute him. She would not condemn him to a life of imprisonment. Instead, she would exile him. She would send him to a remote monastery, a place of solitude, of contemplation, of penance. He would be stripped of his titles, his lands, his possessions. He would live a simple life, a life of service, a life of atonement. It was a controversial decision, met with resistance from many, with approval from some. But Isolde stood firm, her conviction unwavering, her heart guiding her judgment. Aldrich accepted his fate, his exile, his penance. He knew it was more than he deserved. He had been given a second chance, a chance to redeem himself, a chance to find peace. Isolde watched him leave, her heart filled with a mixture of sadness, regret, and a flicker of hope. She had made a difficult decision, a decision that had tested her heart, her conscience, her sense of justice. But she had done what she believed was right. She had chosen mercy over vengeance, forgiveness over hatred, hope over despair. The heart's reckoning was complete. And Isolde, the falcon, had chosen to forgive the wolf. Chapter 19. Blood on the Snow. Years passed. Isolde, as regent, ruled alongside King Oberon, guiding the kingdom towards a new era of peace and prosperity. She implemented reforms, rooted out corruption, and established a fairer system of justice. She earned the respect and loyalty of the people, becoming known as Isolde the Just, Isolde the Wise, Isolde the Merciful. Lord Elric, restored to his lands and titles, served as her closest advisor, his wisdom and experience guiding her decisions. He had recovered from his ordeal, but the scars remained, a constant reminder of the battles they had fought, the sacrifices they had made. King Oberon, humbled by his past failures, became a figurehead, content to let Isolde lead, to learn from her, to support her efforts. He had found redemption, not in power, but in service, in humility, in acceptance. The kingdom prospered. Trade flourished, the arts thrived, and the people lived in relative peace and security. But the scars of the past remained, a constant reminder of the fragility of peace, of the ever-present threat of conflict, of the darkness that lurked beneath the surface of even the most prosperous societies. One winter, as a heavy snow fell, blanketing the kingdom in a pristine white shroud, a new threat emerged. A band of raiders from the northern tribes crossed the border, attacking villages, pillaging towns, and spreading terror and chaos. They were a fierce and brutal people, known for their savagery, their ruthlessness, and their disregard for the laws of the kingdom. They were led by a chieftain named Ragnar, a man of immense size and strength, a warrior feared and respected by his followers. The king's army, weakened by years of peace and complacency, was ill-prepared to deal with this new threat. The initial skirmishes were disastrous, the kingdom's forces routed, the raiders advancing deeper into the heart of the land. Isolde, realizing the gravity of the situation, took command of the army, rallying the troops, inspiring them with her courage and her unwavering determination. She rode at the head of her forces, clad in armor, her silver dagger at her side, her father's locket around her neck, a symbol of her resolve, of her commitment to protect her people, to defend her kingdom. She met with Ragnar, under a flag of truce, hoping to negotiate a peace, to avoid further bloodshed. But Ragnar was a man of war, a man of conquest, a man who believed only in strength, in violence, in domination. "I offer you peace, chieftain," Isolde said, her voice firm, her gaze unwavering. "Leave our lands, and we will not pursue you. We will even offer you tribute, supplies, to aid your people." Ragnar laughed, a deep, guttural sound that echoed in the stillness of the snow-covered field. "Peace?" he said, his voice mocking. "I do not seek peace. I seek conquest. I seek to claim your lands, your wealth, your women." He looked at Isolde, his eyes filled with a predatory lust, a desire to possess her, to dominate her, to break her. "You are a beautiful woman, Regent," he said, his voice a low growl. "A strong woman, a woman worthy of a warrior. Surrender to me, and I will spare your people. Become my queen, and I will make you Empress of the North." Isolde met his gaze, her expression cold, her heart filled with a fierce determination. "I will never surrender," she said, her voice unwavering. "I will never submit to you. I will fight you, to the death if necessary." Ragnar smiled, a cruel, predatory smile. "So be it," he said. "If it is war you want, then it is war you shall have. But know this, Regent, I will defeat you. I will conquer your kingdom, and I will take you." The negotiations failed. The battle was inevitable. Isolde prepared her forces, deploying them strategically, using the terrain to her advantage, drawing on her knowledge of warfare, her understanding of her enemy. She knew she was outnumbered, outmatched, but she was not defeated. She would fight with courage, with intelligence, with a fierce and unwavering determination. The battle began at dawn, the snow-covered field stained red with blood, the silence shattered by the clash of steel, the cries of the wounded, the roar of the warriors. It was a brutal and savage conflict, a struggle for survival, a test of wills, a clash of civilizations. Isolde fought with a courage and skill that surprised even her. She led her troops from the front, inspiring them with her bravery, her determination, her unwavering belief in their cause. She saw her father fall, struck by an arrow, his body crumpling to the ground. Her heart leaped with fear, with grief, but she knew she could not falter. She had to keep fighting. She saw Ragnar, the chieftain, cutting a swathe through her ranks, his axe dripping with blood, his eyes filled with a savage fury. He was a formidable opponent, a warrior of immense strength and skill. She knew she had to stop him. She had to defeat him. She had to end this. She rode towards him, her sword drawn, her heart pounding, her mind focused on her task. She engaged him in combat, a desperate struggle, a dance of death. He was stronger than her, more skilled than her, but she was more determined, more resourceful, more driven. She parried his blows, dodged his attacks, using her agility, her quickness, to evade his superior strength. She saw an opening, a flicker of vulnerability in his defense. She lunged, her sword aimed at his heart. But he was too quick. He deflected her blow, his axe striking her shoulder, sending a searing pain through her body. She staggered, but she did not fall. He raised his axe, ready to deliver the final blow, to end her life, to claim his victory. But then, a figure intervened, a figure clad in black, a figure wielding a familiar sword. It was Aldrich. He had escaped from the monastery, had heard of the invasion, had come to help. He engaged Ragnar in combat, his sword flashing, his movements swift and precise. He was a skilled warrior, a master of the blade, and he fought with a ferocity born of desperation, of redemption, of a desire to atone for his past sins. He fought Ragnar to a standstill, his strength matching the chieftain's, his skill surpassing his. He saw an opening, a flicker of vulnerability. He lunged, his sword piercing Ragnar's heart, ending his life, ending his reign of terror. The raiders, seeing their leader fall, lost heart, their morale shattered, their attack faltering. Isolde's forces rallied, pressing their advantage, driving the raiders back, securing their victory. The battle was over. The kingdom had been saved. But at a great cost. Isolde, wounded and exhausted, knelt beside her father, his body lying lifeless on the blood-stained snow. She held his hand, her tears falling, her heart breaking. She looked up and saw Aldrich, standing over her, his sword dripping with blood, his face etched with a mixture of exhaustion, relief, and sadness. He had saved her life. He had saved the kingdom. He had redeemed himself. But he had also reminded her of the past, of the pain, of the betrayal, of the loss. Aldrich, she said, her voice barely a whisper.
Why?
He looked at her, his eyes filled with a complex mixture of emotions: regret, remorse, gratitude, and a flicker of love. I owed you, he said, his voice hoarse. I owed you my life. And I wanted to prove to you that I was not the man you thought I was. He paused, then knelt beside her, his hand reaching out to touch her father's face. I am sorry, Isolde, he said, his voice choked with emotion. For everything. Isolde looked at him, her heart aching, her mind conflicted. She had forgiven him, but she could not forget. She had saved his life, but she could not love him again. The snow continued to fall, blanketing the battlefield, covering the dead, concealing the scars, promising a new beginning, a new future. But the blood on the snow remained, a constant reminder of the price of peace, of the cost of freedom, of the enduring power of the past. The victory was bittersweet, a triumph marred by loss, a future uncertain, even in its promise. The snow covered everything, but it could not erase the stains of the past. Chapter 20. The Dawn of Redemption. The aftermath of the battle was a time of mourning and rebuilding. Isolde, despite her own grief over her father's death, took charge, organizing the relief efforts, tending to the wounded, and securing the borders. She was hailed as a heroine, a savior, a leader who had risen to the challenge and protected her people. Aldrich, having proven his loyalty and his valor, was granted a pardon by the king, with Isolde's strong endorsement. However, he chose not to return to court, instead opting to remain at the remote monastery, dedicating his life to service and penance. He had found a measure of peace, a purpose, a way to atone for his past sins. Isolde visited him occasionally, their meetings formal and restrained, but tinged with a shared understanding, a mutual respect, and a lingering sadness for what might have been. They spoke of the kingdom, of the challenges ahead, of the need for continued vigilance, but they avoided speaking of their past, of their failed marriage, of their lost love. King Oberon, weakened by age and grief, and increasingly reliant on Isolde's guidance, finally decided to abdicate the throne. He named Isolde his successor, recognizing her strength, her wisdom, her right to rule. Isolde accepted the crown, not with joy or triumph, but with a solemn sense of responsibility, of duty, of purpose. She knew that the challenges ahead would be great, that the path to a truly just and prosperous kingdom would be long and arduous. Her coronation was a grand affair, attended by nobles from across the land, representatives of foreign powers, and commoners who had come to pay homage to their new queen. She wore a simple gown of white, a symbol of purity, of hope, of a new beginning. She did not wear the crown of thorns, but a new crown, forged from the melted-down weapons of the fallen, a symbol of peace, of unity, of a commitment to a better future. As she stood before the assembled crowd, taking the oath of office, she spoke of her vision for the kingdom, of her commitment to justice, to fairness, to the well-being of her people. She spoke of the need for unity, for cooperation, for a shared responsibility to build a better future. She also spoke of her father, of his legacy, of his unwavering belief in justice, of his sacrifice. She vowed to honor his memory, to continue his work, to build the kingdom he had dreamed of. And she spoke of Aldrich, acknowledging his role in saving the kingdom, his courage, his redemption. She announced that she had granted him a full pardon, that he was free to return to court, to reclaim his titles, to rejoin society. But Aldrich declined. He sent a message to Isolde, thanking her for her generosity, but stating that he had found his peace, his purpose, in the monastery, that he wished to remain there, to continue his life of service, of atonement. Isolde understood. She respected his decision. She knew that he had found his own path to redemption, a path that was different from hers, but no less valid, no less meaningful. She ruled wisely and justly, guided by her father's principles, tempered by her own experiences, and informed by her own understanding of human nature. She implemented reforms, promoted education, encouraged trade, and fostered a culture of tolerance and understanding. She never remarried. She had loved once, deeply, passionately, but that love had been tainted by betrayal, by loss, by the enduring scars of the past. She found fulfillment in her work, in her service to her people, in her commitment to building a better future. She often thought of Aldrich, of the man he had been, of the man he had become, of the what might have been. She wondered if he ever thought of her, if he ever regretted his choices, if he ever longed for a different life. But she knew that the past could not be changed, that the choices they had made had shaped their destinies, that their paths had diverged, never to meet again. She ruled for many years, a long and prosperous reign, marked by peace, by justice, by a steady and unwavering commitment to the well-being of her people. She became known as Isolde the Great, a legendary queen, a symbol of hope, of strength, of redemption. As she grew older, she began to think about her legacy, about the future of the kingdom, about who would succeed her. She had no children of her own, no heir to inherit the throne. She considered several candidates, young nobles, ambitious courtiers, but none of them seemed to possess the qualities she sought: the strength, the wisdom, the compassion that were necessary to rule justly and effectively. Then one day she received a visitor, a young man, tall and strong, with dark hair and piercing gray eyes, a young man who bore a striking resemblance to Aldrich. He was Aldrich's son, born in the monastery, raised by the monks, educated in the ways of peace, of service, of redemption. He had come to court, seeking an audience with the queen, seeking his destiny. Isolde saw in him the qualities she had sought, the strength of his father, tempered by the wisdom of his upbringing, the compassion of his heart, the promise of a better future. She knew, in that moment, that she had found her heir, the successor who would continue her work, who would build on her legacy, who would lead the kingdom to an even brighter dawn. The dawn of redemption had arrived. The falcon had found her heir, a young wolf, raised in peace, ready to rule. The cycle was complete. The future was secure. And Isolde, the Great, could finally rest, knowing that her kingdom was in good hands. The snow had melted. The blood had faded. And a new spring had arrived. Epilogue. Years later, on a crisp autumn day, Queen Isolde, her hair now silvered with age, but her eyes still bright with wisdom and compassion, walked through the gardens of Ashenmere. The leaves were turning, a tapestry of gold and crimson, a reminder of the passage of time, of the cycles of life and death, of renewal. The castle, once a symbol of her father's unjust imprisonment and her own forced marriage, had been transformed. It was no longer a fortress of fear and intrigue, but a beacon of hope and justice. The halls that had once echoed with whispers of conspiracy now rang with the laughter of children, the bustle of commerce, and the steady hum of a thriving community. She paused by the ancient oak tree, the sentinel that had stood guard over Ashenmere for centuries. It had witnessed so much joy and sorrow, love and loss, war and peace. It had seen her father's rise and fall, her own struggles and triumphs, the transformation of the kingdom. She reached out and touched the rough bark of the tree, feeling a connection to the past, to her ancestors, to the enduring spirit of Ashenmere. She thought of her father, of his unwavering belief in justice, of his love, of his sacrifice. She thought of Master Gareth, of his loyalty, of his courage, of his ultimate sacrifice. She thought of Aldrich. She had not seen him in many years, but she had heard of him. He remained at the monastery, a respected elder, a counselor, a healer. He had found his peace, his purpose, his redemption. She wondered if he ever thought of her, if he ever regretted the choices they had made, if he ever longed for a different life. She knew that she would never forget him. He had been a part of her life, a part of her heart, a part of her destiny. He had been her enemy, her husband, her betrayer. But he had also been her savior, her redeemer, her unexpected ally. She smiled, a faint, wistful smile. Life was a complex tapestry, woven with threads of joy and sorrow, love and loss, betrayal and forgiveness. It was a journey, a struggle, a dance. And she had danced it well. She continued her walk, her steps slow but steady, her gaze fixed on the horizon. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the land, a promise of a new dawn, a new beginning, a new future. She saw a young man approaching her, tall and strong, with dark hair and piercing gray eyes. It was Aldrich's son, her heir, the future king. He bowed low, his expression respectful, his eyes filled with admiration and a hint of trepidation. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice clear and strong. "The council awaits your guidance." Isolde smiled, a warm, welcoming smile. "Then let us not keep them waiting," she said, her voice firm but gentle. She took his arm, and together, they walked towards the castle, towards the future, towards the dawn of a new era. The falcon and the young wolf, walking side by side, symbols of a kingdom united, of a legacy secured, of a redemption fulfilled. The past was behind them, the present was theirs, and the future was bright. The long journey was over, but a new one was beginning, under a sky filled with the promise of peace and the enduring hope of a brighter tomorrow.